Well, what do you know? It is that time once again to be talking about the BFI London Film Festival. I've been covering the festival every year on this channel since 2018, and this is the 4th year I've done it as press. And I definitely made the most out of it this year by seeing a total of 21 different films. Yeah, that's an awful lot to get through. So, without any further ado, this is everything that I watched at the London Film Festival 2025. So the first film that I watched at the film festival was a documentary called Only on Earth. This is a documentary that views climate change and humans' interactions with animals and how we coexist together from an observational perspective. And what I mean by that is that the camera in the film literally just observes these things happening. It observes a small village in the middle of the Spanish countryside and how the inhabitants of the village live with animals and work with the wildlife, but also how both of those deal with climate change, because wildfires happen in this area quite often. Now, this film takes a slightly unique approach compared to other documentaries that I've seen on the subject matter. There is no narration, there is no single person or protagonist that you are following throughout the whole film. The film is literally just showing you things as they happen, and that's how it's trying to get its core messages across. It's literally just showing you these things, and that's kind of doing the majority of the work. And in terms of going for that approach, the film does mostly succeed. However, I think because it lacks a central person or people that we follow, and I think because it also, from a narrative and cohesion standpoint, is a bit all over the place, I think it does fall apart a little bit, because you need some form of narrative structure, or you need someone to follow to get that extra sort of emotional oomph from the messages that it's trying to get across. I think it works in terms of getting its concept across, but in terms of going just a bit further and giving the themes of the film just a bit more impact, it really needed that extra bit more. After that, I then saw the film More Life, which essentially is a hangout film shot entirely from the perspective of an Instagram live stream. And initially, I wasn't quite sure how this was going to work, but now having seen it, I actually think it works really well. I think having it shot in that Instagram live, stream approach, I think really adds a layer of authenticity to what you're seeing. But on top of that, all the cast genuinely feel like a group of mates that are just getting together. And I think from that perspective, the film really succeeds. It does lose a bit of momentum going into the third act of the film. But in terms of trying to be as authentic as it can be for a hangout film, I don't think I've ever seen a film be as real as this one. This feels like a very one and done film as well. I don't think there is much rewatchability to it. It is very much a case of once you've seen it once, you kind of get everything the film wants you to get. But it is good. And funnily enough, we're going straight from one hangout film to another, because the next film that I watched was Fwends. Yes, that is actually the name of this film. This is another hangout movie, but handled in a completely different style. This one focuses on two friends who have not seen each other for years, who meet up for one weekend in Melbourne, and that's kind of all you need to know. It's literally just two friends walking about Melbourne, having a chat. And I think in terms of what it's going for here, in terms of the style of hangout film that it's, trying to achieve, again, I think it really works. They're going for something completely different compared to More Life. More Life was trying to be authentic and as real as possible, whereas Fwends is really doubling down on that sort of awkward kind of humour, which is very hit and miss in films, but here I think it really works. But it also really taps into that whole thing of these are two friends that have not seen each other for years, so things have changed between them that one person is having trouble trying to adapt with than the other. I think it does it really well, and I think what really helps that is the two lead performances are fantastic, but also one thing I only found out after seeing the film is that all of the dialogue in the movie is improvised. There isn't really a script, and at times it does show, but in terms of, from a dialogue perspective anyway, I think the improvisational approach really works. And I think that, matched with the way this film is shot and them two just walking around Melbourne, almost makes it feel like an off-the-cuff version of A Real Pain a little bit. It's nowhere near as good as A Real Pain, but tonally that's kind of the same vibe that I got. And I think this is, compared to More Life, this film will be very hit and miss. Some people will either click with what it is trying to do, or it just will not work for you at all. But for me, it won me over from the moment it started. I think it does lose momentum in the last half, where it decides to go off-piste and try something a little bit different. I appreciate it trying something different, but I think tonally it does start to conflict with itself. But for the most part, this was a fun watch, and I definitely think there is an audience for this type of film. And hey, at the end of the day, this and More Life would make a great double bill. It definitely worked for me anyway. After that, I then watched another documentary. This one was called Ultras, and for those of you that don't know what Ultras are, it's basically a subculture of football fandom, where the fans take their passion for the sport and the love of the game to another level. So you have regular football fans, but then you have ultras who take that passion just one step further. And I didn't really know much about the idea of ultras at all, but this film does a really good job of showing you all perspectives. Because when most people hear the word ultras, they immediately go to football hooligans and people that start riots and fights after the matches. However, that's only one side to ultras, and the documentary does a brilliant job of showing different countries, different football clubs, and how the fans treat their label as being an ultras. Some just do it for the passion of the sport and show their love for their club by making, I don't know, giant banners that span the entire wing of a stadium, whereas other people in other countries will take it down that more violent route. And that's one of my favourite things about this documentary, is that it doesn't lean too heavily on one angle. It shows all of these perspectives on a blanket playing field, pardon the pun. It shows you all of them as they are, and you're just kind of given this wide spectrum of the different ways people love their sport and show their passion for it. And I really love that. I really love the fact that it doesn't take a side, so to speak. And I also like the fact that there are no faces to the interviews. All of the interviews are audio only, and you are being shown all of this footage, whether it be archival or shot specifically for this documentary. And that does the majority of the heavy lifting in terms of getting across what the people are saying. The next film I saw was Love, Brooklyn. This was easily one of the most underwhelming films I saw at the festival, unfortunately, which is a shame, because I did go into this one wanting to like it, but came away just really underwhelmed for a number of reasons. There are positives to take away. I think the film is shot fine, but I do think the cast are the best thing in the film. Even when the dialogue and the writing don't really do any favours, I think the cast are constantly trying their best to make that dialogue work. And I think especially Andre Holland and DeWanda Wise are probably the two best examples here. Some of the dialogue they're given really isn't the best, but they are trying their best to make it work. And I hate seeing that in a film where the script, underperforms and the actors really have to do more of the work to make these scenes click. But that definitely is the case with this film. I think from a story and dialogue perspective, it just has one thing going for it, and it just kind of, keeps going with that one thing and doesn't really know where else to take it. It feels very one note throughout the majority of the film, and when it does try to veer off of that to try something else, it feels like a little too late. After that, I then saw my first of the big films at the festival with Edward Berger's Ballad of a Small Player. I was really excited for this one because I loved his remake of All Quiet on the Western Front just a few years ago, and I loved Conclave, which he only made last year. So to see him come out with another film so quickly, I was all for it because I thought surely he's going to have 3 home runs in a row. And unfortunately, Ballad of a Small Player isn't quite the home run I was expecting. It's still a good, decent film, but compared to the other two I mentioned, this one has more faults that kind of are more glaring in the long run. First off, the things I must praise in this film are the cinematography and the editing. I think this is one of the most slick, stylish, and visually energetic films I saw at the entire festival. And from that perspective, I cannot fault it. I think anything from a technical perspective I cannot fault regarding this film or any of Edward Berger's previous films. The guy knows what he's doing when it comes to directing. I think this film looks the part, definitely sounds the part. There are some really creative uses of sound design that really blew me away in places. Some are very subtle, some are very obvious, but again, technically, this film is brilliant. I also really liked Colin Farrell's main performance in this film. I think he brings a lot of energy to his performance. There are times where he's very chaotic and all over the place, but then there are other times where he's a little bit more calculated, and I really like that balance, and I think he does find that balance just right. He doesn't veer too much in terms of going over the top, and the times where he does go over the top, it works because the scene calls for it. I think where this film does start to fall apart, however, is with its structure and in terms of what it wants to do at certain points. I think from a narrative perspective, I get what it's trying to do, but I think just a small bit of reworking in terms of the placement of scenes or the ordering of stuff could have just made it a little bit better, because we are shown things that happen and we're meant to kind of take them at face value until we're not meant to take them at face value and they're actually more implied. And I'm trying not to give away spoilers, but the way the film executes these things makes it feel very at war with itself. After that, I then saw The Voice of Hind Rajab. I didn't really know much about this one going into it. The only reason I went to see it is because there was a lot of hype around it coming out of Venice Film Festival, and it also won the main award at Venice Film Festival. So that alone had me intrigued, along with the amount of big names that were attached to this film as producers. Brad Pitt, Rooney Mara, Joaquin Phoenix, Alfonso Cuarón, just to name a few. So I was really intrigued. And now having seen this film, this is probably one of the best, most important films of the year. For those of you that don't know the story, basically a young 6-year-old girl called Hind Rajab was stuck in her car in the middle of the occupied zone in Gaza. She then phoned the Palestine Red Crescent team, and the workers stayed on the phone with her for almost an entire day to make sure she was okay whilst they tried to organise safety to come to her and take her out of the occupied zone. This is one of the most tense and harrowing cinematic experiences I've had all year, and that's down to a number of reasons. First of all, the way this film is shot and directed is very much in the style of Catherine Bigelow or Paul Greengrass, where the camera doesn't stay still all the time. It's very much moving with the actors, very documentary style. And I think the film really benefits from being shot in that way. It's not squeaky clean, it's not perfect, it's deliberately a bit rough around the edges, but it works. And whilst we're on the topic of documentary, this film adds real-world elements from the actual story that happened into the proceedings, which very much blurs the line between dramatization and the actual reality of the story. And I've heard some people call it exploitative, which again, I can completely understand. And there are a couple points where it does start to veer a bit too heavily into that territory. But from my perspective, I think it all worked in service of trying to tell the story they're trying to tell as emotionally as possible, like emotionally resonant as possible anyway. I don't really know what else to say about this film other than the fact that you should all see it for yourselves. And when you get the opportunity to see it, please go and watch it, because I think it is one of the most important films of the year. I wouldn't necessarily call it my favourite because of the subject matter, and the fact that I don't think I'll ever have the guts to watch it again. But in terms of what it's trying to say and how it's executed it, this is easily one of the most important films of the year. So definitely don't miss it if you get the chance to watch it. After that, I then went to the surprise film on the same day. I was kind of looking forward to this because the only time I've done the surprise film at London in the past was in 2023 when it ended up being Michael Mann's Ferrari, and I was not a fan of that film whatsoever. So I was a little bit skeptical because I was expecting this similar sort of thing to happen again. But thankfully, this year's surprise film at London was Tuna, which is a film that nobody guessed at all. Usually people have a rough idea as to what the film will be, but this year no one guessed Tuna at all, and it was the biggest surprise for me, not just of the festival, but of the whole year. Because as it currently stands, this might be my favourite film of the year so far. I loved this movie so much. This film is directed by Daniel Roher, who is more known for documentaries such as Navalny and last year's Blink, which is a lovely little documentary if you've never seen it. And this is his first venture into fictional filmmaking. And if this is his first attempt, I genuinely cannot wait to see what else he does, because this feels like it was made by someone who's been doing it for years. It feels effortlessly stylish. It feels, I don't know, the whole film just feels miraculous in terms of its execution. The performances, the editing, the cinematography, the use of music throughout the film, just all of it worked perfectly for me. A lot of people came away from this film either liking it or thinking it was fine. Personally, I had a stupid grin on my face because it just worked. I think the other thing that impresses me the most about this film is that it blends comedy, heartfelt drama, and even heist crime thriller elements all so seamlessly together. Because I've seen some films that try to do all of these things at once, and you can tell where one thing stops to then make way for the other thing. But here, the way that the whole film just flows and goes in and out of things just feels, again, effortless in execution. After that, I then went to see Noah Baumbach's newest film, J. Kelly. I, again, was also really excited to see this one because I like Noah Baumbach as a filmmaker. I love Frances Ha. I love Marriage Story. So I was really intrigued to see how he would tackle a film about an actor whose time in the limelight isn't as, golden or as prevalent as it used to be. And though it does have a few faults here and there, for the most part, I really liked what J. Kelly had to say. I think the entirety of its cast are perfect. I've always had a soft spot for George Clooney anyway, but this feels like a career best performance from him, mainly because a lot of it is coming from a personal place. Not just from his performance, but the way his character is written as well. You can tell that he's really delving into certain personal areas that he hasn't necessarily done in other roles. And I really liked seeing that extra layer of vulnerability from him that we've never really seen before. But on top of that, you've got the likes of Laura Dern and Adam Sandler, and even Billy Crudup shows up at one point, who are all fantastic in their roles. I would not be surprised if Adam Sandler gets a Best Supporting Actor nomination for his role in this film. But I think the reason why this film worked for me in the long run, despite a few scenes that felt like they maybe went on a bit too long, or, a couple moments here and there where it dragged, I think the reason why it worked for me in the long run was because overall this feels like one giant love letter to an era of actors that we don't really get anymore, or certain actors that are still around, but their heyday has kind of come and gone, even though they still work and are still good at it. Also, I just love how honest the film is as well, considering how grand and big it feels at times, and considering the cast that you have. I just love how open and honest it felt at times, and I don't think we get enough of those sorts of films. Films that tap into a certain aspect of the Hollywood system, whether it be actors or, filmmakers or whatever, that is just openly honest and doesn't care about its honesty. And I think that is, for me, the biggest reason why I love this film so much. The next film I saw was a weird documentary drama hybrid called Broken English. This film focuses on the life of Marianne Faithfull, who most people know as Mick Jagger's girlfriend from the 60s. But in fact, she had a quite illustrious music career, making tons of albums over the years, and the film tries to delve into her as a person and just her career and life, but from her perspective. For overall, I thought this film was fine. There is one major issue, though, that comes from the film itself that gets in the way of itself. I think whenever it's focusing directly on Marianne, I think it's brilliant, because I didn't genuinely know much about her anyway. So hearing all of these amazing things that she's done throughout her life, and all of the things she's gone through, again, genuinely fascinating. I think the one main issue with this film is that the concept that surrounds the documentary gets in the way of telling Marianne's story, which is the one thing it's trying so hard to do. So the way this film is framed is around a fictional department of not forgetting, where you have actors like Tilda Swinton and George McKay and other actors that just pop up randomly throughout the film, who are playing members of this department who are trying to piece together pieces of Marianne's life while she's being interviewed by George McKay, and trying to really hone down the prevalence of her career and why her life was so important in the first place. When it is the interviews with George McKay talking to Marianne face to face, brilliant, riveting. When it cuts away from that and gets too wrapped up in the department that it's created, this film is created, it feels like it's getting too carried away with that element, and therefore loses a bit of focus. There is a really interesting, plain and simple documentary here that is covered in something else that doesn't need to be there. The next film I saw was Love Me Tender, starring Vicky Krieps, and to be honest, Vicky Krieps is kind of the only reason why I went to see this film. I didn't really know anything else about it other than the fact that she was in it, but I really like her as an actor, and she was kind of the only reason why I went to see it. And overall, I really like this film. It's got a few pacing issues, and it is maybe a bit longer than it needs to be, but if you're looking for a very effective, simple little drama that is just as heartbreaking as it is beautiful, this is made for you. I think the standout element is Vicky Krieps, who genuinely makes some of these scenes work more than they should. And overall, I think the idea of the film, in terms of a mum trying to get custody back of her kid whilst also exploring her sexuality at the age that she is, I think has a lot of avenues to go down, and I think the film explores them in very interesting ways. There are a couple points where it feels like it kind of gets stuck on repeat a little bit in terms of what it does, but by the time you get to the end, I think it does all feel worth it. After that, I then saw a documentary animation hybrid called Endless Cookie. Again, this is another one that I went into kind of blind. And the only reason I ended up seeing this film is because I didn't get into Hamnet, which I'm a little bit annoyed about. So I ended up seeing this and the next film I'm going to talk about instead. But I think it paid off because Endless Cookie, though it's not my favourite film I saw at the festival, it's definitely an interesting watch. The way this film goes about telling its story, if it even has one, is that it's just a series of conversations between these two brothers that has animation on top of it to back up and visually tell the stories that they're telling. Um, Overall, I quite liked this movie, especially in terms of its charm and its style. Whether you can say it has a style anyway. The animation style of this film is deliberately very iffy and homemade, and is very quirky. I guess that is the way you can sum up this film. 1 minute it can be very funny, and the next it can be kind of heartwarming. And then there are other bits that are just downright weird. And I liked how real it felt in that sense. These are genuine, actual, real people that just happen to have been making a documentary, um, and that can mean that tangents sort of happen out of nowhere, and things don't get cleared up, and things just sort of get dropped off. That might frustrate some people, but the film makes it very apparent from the word go that like this is going to be a rather deliberately messy film, so don't expect anything perfect. And now we go from one animated film to another with the anime Chao. Again, another one that I didn't really know much about going into it, but because I didn't get the film I wanted for this day, I ended up going for Chao because I'd heard some other people that I know who went to see it earlier in the week that really liked it. So I checked it out on a whim, and this was really delightful. This sort of animation style that is very scratchy and over the top, and proportions of characters are all over the place. For example, one guy might just be a giant head and another person might just look normal. That sort of style is a bit new to me when it comes to anime, but it all fits the tone of this film perfectly. It's a bit wacky, it's a bit over the top. It's one of the most vibrantly beautiful and colourful animated films I've seen all year. And yeah, again, this one really worked. It won me over from the moment it started, and it very much is doing its own thing, and then the emotional aspect sneaks up on you at one point and completely then shifts the film. But it's not the main focus, if that makes sense. It's just reinforcing the character motivations that were there from the start. It just makes them more prevalent and powerful. And it also didn't take me out of it either. Sometimes an emotional element in an anime can just sort of come in and feel unwarranted, whereas here, it all just works. After that, I then saw The Choral, which is the new Alan Bennett adaptation directed by Nicholas Hunter. I was looking forward to this one because the last time that Nicholas Hunter adapted an Alan Bennett thing to film was The Lady in the Van, and that was one of my nan's favourite films, and it's also one that just works. I really like that film quite a bit. So tonally, I was expecting something along those lines, and with The Choral, I didn't quite get that, but it's still a decent little watch. The best way I can sum this film up is that if this film comes on ITV on a Sunday afternoon, it's perfect for that watching. But in terms of going out of your way to watch it yourself, that will purely depend on your preference to these sorts of films. But yeah, for me, I think it worked more than it didn't. However, there are other times where it feels a bit conflicting. You have this really heartwarming and light aspect about the core, the choir, which works, and I think when it focuses on that, it works. But then you have a subplot about some of the lads in the choir being sent off to go to war and are trying to have sex for the first time before they go to war. And these two things don't work in the same film. I get why they're there because it's appropriate for the time period and probably what lads that age were trying to do before they got sent off. But when you have a light-hearted, twee little British drama about a choir that is heartwarming and unifying in theme and tone, and then you have that on the side, they don't they don't work. After that, I then saw If I Had Legs, I'd Kick You, which I think wins Best Title for any film at the festival this year. I was really excited about this one because I saw the trailer a few months ago and absolutely loved it. And unfortunately, I can't really say the same about the film. I did like the film, but if you've seen the marketing and you go into it expecting a dark comedy drama, yes, you do sort of get that, but there are also chaotic, tense horror elements to it that sort of come out of nowhere. The best way I keep describing this film is that it feels like Uncut Gems but about a mum instead of a jeweler. That's the best way to sum up the tone and execution of this film. It's chaotic as fuck. um, it's very tense at times. It's very deliberately messy. Part of that down to Rose Byrne's character. And yeah, if you go into the film expecting that, then you might like it a bit more than I did. And again, I'm not saying that I didn't like this film. I thought it was good. It's just not what I was expecting. Tonally, I don't know. It just, I get why it's doing what it's doing. And for the most part, when it really wants to double down on the hecticness of what's going on and why Rose Byrne's character is such a bad mum, it really does double down on those elements. And I think it does so to a T, like almost faultlessly. And I think half of that is down to Rose Byrne's performance, where she gives an absolutely brilliant career best performance, in my opinion. But it's just that the tone of the film and how chaotic and stressful it can kind of be a bit much at times. The next film I watched was H is for Hawk, which again is another one that I didn't really know anything about going into it. I think all I knew about this one was the fact that it was based off a book and that it starred Claire Foy and Brendan Gleeson, which, to be honest, were the only reasons that I was going into this film, is because I like those two actors. And I came away from this one pleasantly surprised. This is a really touching little drama that really taps into a side of grief that I wish was explored a bit more in film and TV. I think the way that this film looks at distraction as a coping mechanism to distract yourself from dealing with a loved one dying, I think is handled so honestly and openly in this film, to the point where it almost feels a bit too real. But I think that is, I'm not saying that as a negative, I mean that as a positive. I think the way this film handles it is so well done. And a lot of that is down to Claire Foy, who really, really encompasses this character in this film and just makes her feel like a genuine person who cannot cope and deal with the news that she's having to deal with. After that, I then watched probably one of the biggest films at the entire festival, which was Guillermo del Toro's Frankenstein. This was without a doubt my most anticipated film of the entire festival, and thankfully it delivered in every single way. I think the only nitpick I do have with the film is that for a 2 hour 30-minute runtime, there are a couple of instances where it dragged a tiny bit. Apart from that, the rest of this film is like near flawless. This has been a passion project for Del Toro for 20 to 30 years, and it shows. Every ounce of his soul and his love for this story is evident on the screen. The cinematography, the production design, and just the overall atmospheric tone of this film is spot on. It carries over a lot of those, gothic horror things that we expect to see from Del Toro, but obviously some of the fantastical elements are deliberately drawn back, and he instead doubles down on the more body horror, gore, and grotesque natures of it all. And I think that was a good compromise, because as much as we love seeing the fantasy elements of Del Toro's work and what that visually has to offer, I like the fact that he's drawn that back and has instead gone for more simplicity and more of the blood and the gore and that sort of thing. The entire cast for this film is phenomenal, especially Oscar Isaac and Jacob Elordi as the creator and the creature. Oscar Isaac adds a certain sort of flair and eccentricness to his portrayal of Victor Frankenstein that I think really works, yet there are other times where he can tap into a sort of controlling, almost demanding demeanour that really works against that eccentricness. Whereas Jacob Elordi, I I mean, I already liked him as an actor from stuff like Saltburn, but he is incredible here. Like, he truly loses himself in the character to the point where it was a good way into the film that I had to remind myself that that is Jacob Elordi. Overall, Frankenstein is without a doubt one of the best films of the entire year. Guillermo del Toro has poured his heart and soul into this movie, and that is clear from the moment the film starts. I think the biggest disservice this film is going to have, though, is the fact that it is distributed by Netflix, because the only way to fully appreciate this film and take in all of its majesty is by seeing it on the biggest screen possible. That is why I'm so glad I saw it in London in the cinema, because seeing it on the big screen is where it belongs. And when it goes on Netflix on the 7th of November, seeing it on a tiny laptop or on a TV just isn't going to do it justice. Now, after the brilliance that was Frankenstein, I then went into probably the most disappointing film of the whole festival. This was one that I was quite intrigued by, and it ended up just underwhelming, not just me, but I think everyone else who saw it, and that was Kelly Reichardt's The Mastermind. Now, I have seen one of Kelly Reichardt's films before, that is Old Joy. I quite liked it for its simplicity and what it tried to do. However, I don't think her style works for the story she wants to tell in this film. Essentially, this film is about a family man who tries his hand at an art heist, and it goes horribly wrong to the point where he has to go on the run. That's the plot of the film, and that is all the film does. Unfortunately, the most interesting aspect of the film, that being the art heist, is wrapped up in the first 30 minutes, and then the rest of the film is just watching Josh O'Connor go from one place to the next as he sort of meanders and doesn't really know what to do, and making sure he doesn't get caught. That's the film in a nutshell, and it is... I don't like using this term to sum up a film, but it is very boring. Out of the group of mates that I was sat with when watching this film, 3 of them fell asleep during the movie, purely because once it's done the interesting thing, it then just feels very monotonous and repetitive after that point. After that, I then watched Bradley Cooper's new directorial effort, Is This Thing On?, starring Will Arnett and Laura Dern. I was really excited for this one, not just for the fact that it's a new Bradley Cooper film. I quite liked the previous films he's directed, but also because this film is inspired by the life of British comedian John Bishop, who is a comedian that I quite like. And I think for a lot of people based in the UK, just hearing the fact that Bradley Cooper and John Bishop have at some point met and are now in the same sentence is quite hard to comprehend, because you would never expect those two people to have ever crossed paths. But at the end of the day, that doesn't matter if the film isn't any good, but thankfully it is really good. This film sort of sneaks up on you. It takes a while to find its groove, but once it does hit its groove, it is brilliant. It's consistently funny, but it's consistently heartfelt as well in terms of its portrayal of a marriage breaking down, but also trying to find any glimpse of love and romance that's left in that. I know I've said this about some other films already, but it applies to this one as well. It's a very open and honest film, and I just love the fact that it revels in that. Whether it's focusing on the comedic stand-up routines or focusing on the tender, more dramatic moments between Laura Dern and Will Arnett's character, all of it just feels so incredibly honest with itself. And I love the fact that a lot of films at the festival this year have just revelled in being honest. They're not sugarcoating anything, they're not beating around the bush, they're just trying to be honest with themselves, and it works. After that, the next film that I saw was Roofman, directed by Derek Cianfrance. I think by the time this video goes out, Roofman will be out publicly for most people to see in the UK. And now that that's the case, please go and watch this film. It's bloody brilliant. This was the last film I saw in person at the festival, and I'm so glad I ended on this one because it is so good. Again, it's another film that feels just effortless in execution. Overall, this is just a really lovely film that is somehow both humorous and heartbreaking at the same time. And despite the fact that Channing Tatum's character, in very literal terms, is not a good person because he keeps stealing stuff, you do end up wanting to root for the guy because he cares about people. And I think at the end of the day, that is the strongest element of this film, is that through the performances and the way it's directed and the way it gets its themes across, this is a man who just ended up doing a series of wrong things, not out of choice, but because he cares for people. And finally, the last film that I saw at the BFI London Film Festival 2025 was James Sweeney's Twinless. This was a very last minute addition to my watches. I didn't even think I was going to get a chance to see it, but I did. And I'm glad I ended on this one because it is brilliant. I ended on 3 bangers, so to speak. And this one was really, really good. This film rides a very, very fine line between being very moving and quite heavy, but also being genuinely funny without even having to try. There are some films that I've seen this year which are trying their hardest to be funny and failing, whereas this film just throws a line out there and it ends up being the funniest thing in an entire scene. And I love the fact that it's just very nonchalant and effortless in its comedy, but at the same time, when it needs to get down and dirty into its core emotional core, it doesn't shy away from it and lets the scenes sit. It's moving, it's hilarious, and I think the way this film just wraps up as a whole, whilst also delivering a brilliant performance from Dylan O'Brien, and also a brilliant turn from James Sweeney who is not just great in front of the camera, but is great behind the camera as well. This film just works. It is really a miraculous little movie that I can see why it's winning over so many people. So, that is everything that I watched at the BFI London Film Festival 2025. 21 movies overall. It's without a doubt the most films I've ever seen at the festival in one singular year. And it shows because I'm absolutely knackered. If you want to see my full ranking of all 21 films that I saw at the festival, there is a link in the description to my Letterboxd list, which ranks them all. If you like the video, then give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye.